that. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Timothy Harfield, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Blackboard Analytics. It's my great pleasure today to engage in a conversation with Dr. Timothy Rennick, Vice Provost and Vice President for Enrollment Management and Student Success at Georgia State University. Thank you for joining me today, Tim.
Good to be here, Timothy.
So, to jump into it, since 2003, Georgia State University has seen a steady increase in its graduation rates. It has also been praised for having eliminated achievement gaps on the basis of demographic factors like race and ethnicity. So, to what factors do you attribute Georgia State University's success in these areas, and particularly in recent years?
Yeah, it's a great question, and lots of campuses are asking the same question about how they can close these achievement gaps and hopefully eliminate them. I think there have been several factors. One has been a willingness to change some of the fundamental structures of the university. So over the last 5-6 years, we've totally changed the way we onboard students. We've totally changed the way we deliver introductory classes. It used to be lecture formats. Now every math course that we offer at the introductory level is offered in a flipped adaptive classroom. We've totally changed the way we do advising, where we're tracking every student every day for 800 risk factors. It's those kind of fundamental changes at scale that I think makes the difference. What's interesting about the story of Georgia State when it comes to closing achievement gaps is that almost none of our programs are specific to at-risk populations. So we're not running programs specifically for African American students, for low-income students, for first-generation students. We're changing the way we do things for every student. And what we found by that process is that all the boats rise. So every student population across Georgia State is doing better. We've raised our overall graduation rates by 22 percentage points. Every demographic is doing considerably better. But the biggest gains have been enjoyed by the students who struggled the most under the old bureaucracy. So our African American students, our Pell students, our first generation students' graduation rates have risen more than for our middle and upper income students or for our white students. Not because we have specifically targeted those populations, but because we've changed the way the university functions, and the greater benefits have come for the students who struggled the most under the old model.
Yeah, what I really like about this story is the fact that you're addressing the needs of individual students, and you talk about the alerts that you have that allow you to identify students who are struggling and make sure that they remain on track for graduation. But what you're also doing is you are actively identifying institutional and structural barriers to the success of students in general. So you're addressing student success challenge from both sides, from both the individual and the aggregate.
Absolutely, and if I were to kind of weigh the ultimate lift and expense of these sorts of changes, it's about 10% technology and 90% people. The advising technologies we're using now are very different than what were available even 6 or 7 years ago, tracking every student every day for 800 risk factors. And that's great and that's important. But the big effort was redesigning advising so those kind of tracking factors would make a difference. We had to centralize a lot of our advising, come up with common training, bring advisors in from the colleges so that they could all be on the same page, hire additional advisors. We now have about 50 more advisors than we had when we launched some of these initiatives. So, we're spending a certain amount on the technology. We're spending really 10 times the amount on the structural changes and on the added staffing, and that's where a lot of the efforts go. But I'm a keen believer that these kind of structural efforts really not only pay off for students, but they pay off in a more immediate and material fashion as well. Every 1% we increase our retention rates at Georgia State is worth about $3 million a year in added tuition and fee revenues on a continuing basis. And so when you see a transformation of a 22% increase in graduation rates, where students who in the past were dropping out after a semester are now sticking around to the point of graduation, that literally does mean tens of millions of dollars of additional revenues coming into the university.
So you talked about certain things that you've been doing to optimize the teaching and learning experience as well. You talk about flipping the classroom. I know that you're very engaged in questions about adaptive learning, and you're piloting some of that technology at Georgia State as well. But in spite of their complementarities or flip sides of the same coin, there seems to be a fairly large gap in higher education in general between conversations about teaching and learning on the one hand and student success on the other, of course, conceived most commonly in terms of progression, retention, and graduation. What is Georgia State doing to bring conversations about student progression together with those about educational quality and teaching excellence?
Yeah, that's an issue worth thinking through, and I think the good news is that doing the former contributes to the latter. So quite intentionally, when we started these efforts at Georgia State, we concentrated on some of the administrative structures, advising, onboarding, registration, financial aid, because we knew those were areas where we centrally had a lot of leverage and the ability to make transformation on a more scale basis. But the fact that we've done those changes and that we have seen significant improvement and that we have publicized and celebrated that improvement has been part of the climate at which faculty have gotten more involved. So when it comes to adaptive learning, it was a heavy lift to work with the math department to deal with some of the really high non-pass rates that students were suffering in those introductory math courses. 7 years ago, 43% of the students who attempted introductory math courses at Georgia State were getting non-passing grades. And administratively, we went to the chair of the math department, we worked with the faculty, we created seed grants, we created at times maybe even a little coercion to bring about some changes so that now all 8,000 seats a year that we offer of introductory math at Georgia State are offered in a hybrid flipped fashion using adaptive learning technologies. We've lowered the non-pass rates by 35%. But because we did that, and because we celebrated and advertised the changes over the last 2 years, we've had faculty members from psychology, from economics, from political science come forward. We're engaged in a project now partially funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to convert 20,000 seats of introductory social science courses that we deliver every year to hybrid flipped classrooms. And in these cases, it didn't take any politicking to get the faculty on board. We had faculty coming forward and saying, you know, we've seen what they've done in introductory math, and we struggle with some of the same issues in macro and microeconomics. These are tough concepts, and having students just sit there passively and listen to somebody lecture is not the best way to convey it. We could convert our pedagogy to much more adaptive and hybrid. And so this has all been something that's been a lot easier process and a quicker process than our efforts to convert some of the math courses.
So, related to your student success efforts and also your efforts in the classroom, Georgia State University is currently piloting Blackboard Predict. What specific challenges and opportunities does Georgia State hope to address by adding predictive analytics using LMS data in support of its already very successful advising strategy?
Yeah, what we've done over the last 5 years, and we launched our advising analytics 5 years ago this past August, so we've had 5 years of data. We've had over 200,000 in-person interventions between our staff and students based upon the alerts coming out of that platform. But that platform is largely based upon registration data. The courses students are taking, the grades they get in courses, their majors, and so forth. What we've been working on over the last few years is how we can better integrate LMS data. So when you talk of some of the challenges, every faculty member at Georgia State has access to an LMS platform, and about 70% of the faculty are using that LMS platform every semester. But the problem is the data coming out of the LMS platform is so varied, it's difficult to know how to use it. For instance, there are grade books on these platforms where faculty members can register grades and quizzes and so forth. That could be a great source of early alert data for our tracking of risk factors for our students, but for the fact that thousands of faculty use this same gradebook in thousands of different ways. Some faculty are using it to post optional assignments, and the reality is students only need to complete 1 out of 3 in order to be progressing in the course. So we can't just go in there and blindly pull out that data and assume that a student is at risk who maybe did not complete the first assignment, because the background is that the student only has to complete 1 out of the 3 assignments. So what's important about these pilots, including the one we're doing with Blackboard right now, is figuring out ways in which we can use that LMS data at scale in a fashion that's going to give us reliable intelligence that is not going to diminish the student's confidence in the system, but give everybody a better chance of finding risk factors earlier on. If all we do is pull blindly from this LMS data and pull students in and say you're at risk from our platform, and find out that, well, no, it's they only have to complete one out of the first 3 assignments, and this student is not at risk at all, we're going to immediately undermine confidence in the platform. So these pilots are critical to get us to the point where what we're doing is reliable. What it does is produce information that's good for the faculty, good for the advisors, and good for the students. And once we get to that point, we're confident we can scale it across the university.
So I've been waiting to ask you this question, Tim. So in a recent interview, and they beat me to the punch here, but I want you to respond here as well. In a recent interview, you were asked a question. Your scholarly background is in theology and religious studies. Your book on Aquinas is in its 8th printing, I think.
That's true.
And it's been translated into German and Italian. What does Aquinas have to do with student success? Or to put things differently, how has your background as a religious scholar informed your perspective and priorities as a leader in the student success space?
Yeah, talk about incongruous. We're sitting here in the middle of EDUCAUSE, ground zero for education technology, and I'm being interviewed by a PhD in philosophy, and I'm a PhD in religious studies. So it's appropriate that we bend a little bit and ask that question. But I actually do see some connections. One is that, in point of fact, Aquinas was one of the first scientific philosophers. So he spearheaded an approach as the scientific method was emerging in medieval times that took issues and thought about them in much more systematic ways. In fact, he's one of the founders of a field that is now called systematic theology. So the fact that we've used at Georgia State this systematic approach to analyzing a problem, looking at its components, and then trying to rationally think through a solution is something that Thomas Aquinas would be proud of. But I must admit, on a day-to-day basis, I'm not thinking too much about the Summa Theologica. What I will say is the other connection is, for 15 years, I was a full-time faculty member at Georgia State, and my field is religious ethics. So I was teaching the importance of social justice, the importance of ethical systems. At the same time, I was participating in a campus that by any measure was underperforming. When we launched these efforts a little over a decade ago now, our graduation rates at Georgia State were around 30%. We had big achievement gaps. We were underserving the students who put their trust and their futures in our hands. And what motivates me every day, while it's nice that we generate better revenues for the university by the fact that we're holding on to more students and creating more tuition dollars, what motivates me every day is the fact that it's not just that higher education needs to do better by our students, but that we can do better by our students. You look on the surface at Georgia State's story, where we're now graduating more black students than any other college or university in the United States. We've closed the achievement gaps. We've raised our graduation rates 22 percentage points. We're graduating 2,800 more students every year than we were 6 years ago. You look at all that, and then you look at the demographic details, where over the same time period our SAT scores have gone down by about 33 points. Over the same time period, we've doubled the number of Pell students we enroll at Georgia State. Over the same time period, we've lost about $40 to $50 million in state appropriations. You would think, here's a campus that should throw up its hands and say, not our fault. Students may not be doing well, but all of these external factors are conspiring against us, and we just are not in a position to do better. But we can do better. We can do better if we challenge ourselves, put the mirror on ourselves first to see where we are the source of the problems, and then challenge ourselves to make some painful changes. Universities have not been designed from the beginning to serve first-generation low-income students. The reality is at Georgia State now, this past fall, we're enrolling 26,000 Pell students. The entire Ivy League combined is enrolling 9,800 Pell students this fall. So how can we use models that were pioneered in medieval times, including by figures like Thomas Aquinas, and then picked up by the Ivy League, and expect that those same models will work for the type of campuses that we have at big urban universities like Georgia State? We have a design problem, and we need to take it seriously. And this redesign does make a difference. Leveraging technology does make a difference. Proactive outreach does make a difference. And that's what I think we have a moral obligation to do if we're in roles of responsibility at these big public universities.
Yeah, when I think about student success, I think about how it's very easy for an institution to conceive and take the the definition of student very literally. Someone becomes a student relative to the institution once they're admitted, and they cease to become a student once they graduate, and that is the role of the institution. But you, in your approach, and the approach at Georgia State has been to treat that student journey very holistically, to look at the factors, look at students before they become students, and to really take a great interest in how successful they are after they leave the institution as well. So as a final question, there is a lot of hype, and you'll agree with me here, there's a lot of hype in educational technology, and especially around the role of analytics in supporting student success. I think in many respects, the hype is beginning to wane. In the last 5 years. It's also, in certain respects, beginning to increase. It seems to me that a lot of pressure ends up being placed on institutions to invest in analytics, as if data was a magic bullet still. So much of higher education is still rather immature in how it's making use of data to support student success. What advice would you give to institutions that are just starting out on their analytics journey? And there are a lot of them that are still just starting
absolutely,
out.
Absolutely. Just a couple weeks ago, we had Bill Gates come and visit campus. He actually came on his own invitation. He was speaking in downtown Atlanta and knew about a number of our projects. And in fact, as I mentioned, the Gates Foundation has supported some of them and wanted to see on the ground level what we're doing. And we took them through exactly what you're describing, the whole student life cycle, and underlined the point that it's not just one thing. There's not one technology or one platform that is going to transform low graduation rates into a much more success. It is understanding a series of things that students go through in order to address their problems and their needs. And the reality is twofold. One is I don't think Georgia State could be where it is today, having made the gains that we have, although we have a long way to go, without technology. That I used to go to conferences when I first started in this position 10 years ago, and I'd hear some of my counterparts at smaller liberal arts colleges talk about the ability to track every single student and know where they are, oftentimes with hands-on, one-on-one kind of contact with these people. And being at an institution with tens of thousands of students, we now enroll 52,000, I said, well, there's never going to be a time where I could do the same. Wouldn't it be wonderful? And now it is the case that we know for every Georgia State student where they are in their pathway, what they should be taking in the next semester, what their progress is, what their likelihood of graduating 2 and 3 years out is going to be, and so forth. And that's all technology enabled and fantastic. But on the other hand, we also see that there are hundreds of additional campuses that have acquired the same technology we have. In fact, now it's available from vendors. You can go out there and purchase the same systems that Georgia State is using. And many of those campuses have not seen any material change in the outcomes. What it takes is leadership. What it takes is hard campus discussions to realize how we're complicit in the fact that students are not succeeding, and what it takes is change that is not around the margins, but change to the fundamental ways that we operate. The good news is, though, if you're willing to take on those changes, you can see significant changes, transformative changes, and serve the students who have entrusted their future in your hands so much better than we have in the past.
Yeah, so through your involvement with the University Innovation Alliance, you take the notion of scaling innovation very seriously, and you recognize that, just like you're saying, technology in many ways is a necessary part of this, but it's hardly sufficient. What marks the success of an institution are those high-impact practices that put that technology to use. The University Innovation Alliance has been doing an exceptional job sort of sharing those high-impact practices from Georgia State and the other 10 institutions that are part of that, and also sharing high impact practices taking place and being put to use in higher education more generally. And so I appreciate you taking the time today to sit down and talk a little bit about what you've been doing, your approach, so that others, regardless of their technology investments, can benefit from your story.
Thanks, Timothy.
You had a couple of presentations. You presented today on lessons learned from scaling innovations across the country, and tomorrow on bridging the divide between IT and student success. For those of you watching who are at EDUCAUSE, highly suggest you take that in. That's taking place tomorrow, Friday, November 3rd at 9:10. Dr. Rennick, you are also active on Twitter. So for those of you who are interested in following Tim, you can follow him at Tim_Rennick. Is there anywhere else that you suggest people go if they're interested in learning more about
Yeah,
you and the
if
Georgia
you're
State
interested
story?
in these programs, you can go to the Georgia State website, which is just www.gsu.edu. And if you look under student success, in fact, you can just scroll on the homepage and see a bar for student success. You'll find videos, documents, third-party accounts, first-party accounts of a lot of the programs that I've mentioned today and some of their impacts.
Wonderful. Thanks again for joining me, Tim. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Timothy.
it.
Great seeing you.